This week, we are taking a closer look at the women in the running to possibly be the nation's next vice president. Presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden is continuing to vet candidates, and his decision is expected to be announced next week. One of those in the running is former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. She spoke about what she would bring to the vice president position yesterday on CBS This Morning.
In my case, I think what I would bring is almost 20 years of deep experience at the senior-most ranks of the executive branch, getting things done for the American people, wrestling with crises and dealing with the solutions we need. So that's my background as National Security Advisor and many other roles that I've held. And I think that that's very important given the nature of the crises that a new administration would face, from the pandemic to economic recession to our global leadership, which is suffering enormously.
So for more, I want to bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe to take a look at some of the Veep Stakes candidates. Ed, but before we get to that, we learned, of course, today that Joe Biden no longer plans to formally accept a Democratic nomination for president in Milwaukee. What more can you tell us about this decision?
Yeah, you know, Tanya, it's perhaps no surprise given the cases of coronavirus are spiking once again in Wisconsin. But today, Democrats saying that neither Biden, his running mate, nor any other person invited to speak in prime time over the 4 days of the convention will do so from Milwaukee unless they're a Wisconsin Democrat. Everyone else will do it virtually from their home states. Biden plans to do it from Delaware. This, again, perhaps no surprise, again, given the fact that the cases are spiking, given also the fact that the party had already begun to make big changes in its plans, and it emphasized that much of it was going to be done virtually anyway, with people joining from across the 50 states to virtually nominate Biden. Now it appears he'll do it from somewhere in Delaware as well. Of course, Republicans are also scaling back. They've gone from North Carolina to Florida, and now the president said today on Fox News he's thinking about accepting the nomination of his party from the South Lawn of the White House, which may or may not be entirely legal, just given that it's such a partisan political event. We'll see.
It's actually very interesting. A lot of interstate travel is now very limited. So many states are on other states' sort of travel no-go list, as it were, that, you know, require 14-day quarantines when you come back. So it makes a lot of this sort of logistically very challenging, regardless. All right, so let's turn now back to the possible VP candidates, starting with Susan Rice. Ed, she's not held elective office, but she has significant foreign policy experience. She's currently working as a distinguished visiting research fellow at American University's School of International Service. She previously served, of course, as President Obama's national security advisor and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She also held various positions under President Clinton's administration. So, Ed, what could make Susan Rice the pick for Biden?
Well, we'll see. I mean, for one thing, proximity. And that is that they worked together quite closely and frequently over the course of especially the later half of the Obama administration, when she served as White House National Security Advisor and actually had an office right next to Biden's in the West Wing. So if you're looking at who is the person that Biden has worked with most frequently or the closest, the answer is Susan Rice. And so that potentially puts her in a pretty good standing based on the fact that throughout this process, Biden has made clear he's looking for someone with whom he can have a good personal and working relationship, someone with whom he is simpatico, as he likes to say, or not, can work nicely with them. Well, that person would be conceivably Susan Rice. The big barrier to entry for her, of course, as you pointed out, is that she's never run for political office before. Maybe Biden doesn't care. Maybe it won't matter given the way that politics is being done right now because of the pandemic. But that is certainly a potential drawback because she's never really been tested and scrutinized through a political sphere quite before.
Right. All right. So, Ed, let's move on now to someone who originally was running against Biden for the Democratic nomination for president, Senator Elizabeth Warren. As most people know, Warren is a senator from Massachusetts, a role she's held since 2013. Now, Warren, of course, has made popular ideas like a federal wealth tax and was a vocal supporter of Medicare for All, which does contradict with Biden's plan to expand the Affordable Care Act. Warren dropped out of the race after Super Tuesday and endorsed Biden in April. So, Ed, would Biden and Warren be able to come to an agreement on some of these key issues, such as health care, if she was selected as VP? And what strengths would she bring to the position if she were chosen?
Unclear if they would ever find agreement on health care or just agree to disagree. But we do know that in some respects, they have come to an agreement over the summer. And it's another signal of somebody working closely with Biden. A lot of the economic proposals that he proposed or he rolled out over the course of July were actually rooted in ideas that both she and to some extent Bernie Sanders had been proposing over the course of the campaign. Issues related to, college education, to improving or erasing racial inequities in the country, at least from an economic sense. A few other ideas regarding climate change as well. And we know that he has consulted with her in conversation about this a few times over the course of the summer. So in those regards, perhaps there is a signal there that they could potentially work together. Perhaps one of the only drawbacks in her case is a slightly more personal one, and that is the fact that she, like Biden, is in her 70s. And so if there's concern about age and agility and ability to do the job at an older age for voters, you'd have two people there who are in their 70s running the country. And that could give some voters who are concerned about having two presidential candidates in their late 70s some pause.
Also, Ed, are African-American voters who support Biden, are they expecting an African-American woman to be tapped?
Well, no group is monolithic, Tanya, as you know, and so there isn't necessarily a uniformed or universal expectation that he will pick a black female running mate, but certainly there's a preference for a lot of them that they would. And Warren actually polled pretty well with black voters in the early primary states and with Democrats overall. She remains at the top of the list of many Democrats when they're asked in polling who they would prefer. Her and Kamala Harris certainly top the list. That could be partly because, as you've pointed out, they ran for president, so they're better known, but it's also a sign that, they like what she was talking about.
Right. All right, so let's talk about Congresswoman Val Demings. She represents Florida's 10th district and was elected in 2016 and is up for re-election this year. She also served as the Orlando police chief for 27 years, where she was the first woman to serve in the role. She endorsed Biden just 2 days after his strong Super Tuesday showing, so she was an early supporter. Ed, what impact could selecting Val Demings have on Biden's campaign?
Florida, Florida, Florida. She's from the swing state, the big one, the one that both campaigns are after. And more importantly, she's from Central Florida, which is really the battleground within the battleground state. Has great local connections, and people there certainly know her name, not only because of her service to the Orlando Police Department, but her husband's service. He's the former sheriff of Orange County and now the mayor of Orange County, which encompasses Orlando. So the Demings name in Central Florida is very well known and clearly well liked, given that both of them now are in elected office. And next to Tammy Duckworth, the Illinois senator who was the Iraq War veteran and the double amputee who we talked about yesterday, Demings arguably has the most interesting personal background and backstory. The fact that she was in law enforcement before, served as a police chief, got herself elected into Congress. If we were talking 6 months ago, being a police chief was certainly a cooler or perhaps more gold-plated aspect of one's resume. Now, clearly, a little more controversial, especially given that there were some concerns with excessive use of force on the Orlando Police Department when she was in charge. She's talked a little bit about that. But the other issue for her, perhaps, is that she is a little less known than all the others, hasn't been scrutinized at a statewide or national level, and you got to wonder if the Biden campaign's willing to have that scrutiny happen with only about 90 days to go until Election Day.
The clock is ticking. All right. Well, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much for that. And tomorrow you're going to join us again as we look at 3 more of the women on Joe Biden's reported VP list and what they could bring to a Biden ticket. Ed, thank you.
We'll be here. Take care.